The anime begins with the protagonist of the story, Sora Kashiwagi, who, after cleaning his home, receives a package from his father, Mokurin Kashiwagi, who is traveling in Egypt. The young man is surprised by the size of the package, but is even more astonished to find out that it is a coffin. He initially thinks Dracula might be inside, but according to his father's instructions, it contains an adorable mummy. His father asks him to take good care of it as he feels they will get along well. Despite this, Sora is wary since everything his father sends seems to be possessed and tries to harm him. However, the coffin starts to move, and when opened, a small mummy emerges. Although the boy is amazed, he remains cautious and tries to put the mummy back inside. The mummy, however, starts to cry and approaches him. Sora places a book between them to keep her at a distance, but she touches it as if it were a door, leading him to believe she might not be dangerous after all. The small mummy wants to stay with him and even offers to help with the house chores, but it proves impossible since it is dangerous for her. He tries to look up instructions from his father, but finds nothing, and upon checking the books, he realizes it is not the same mummy, leaving him unsure of how to care for her. At that moment, Pochi, the protagonist's small dog, arrives, and after bumping into things, Sora comforts her. The young man then wonders if mummies eat, among other things, while the mummy feels jealous of Pochi and tries to get his attention by barking like the dog and climbing onto his clothes. This causes Pochi to bark too, leading to a lot of noise that makes Sora ask them to be quiet. At that moment, he names the mummy Mikan, who is thrilled and knows she can stay now that she has a name, while Sora finds the situation genuinely endearing. Later, he decides to give Mikan some water, but finds the container too large for her, so he luckily finds a smaller one. Remembering that Pochi is eating, he starts experimenting with different foods for Mikan, but notices she is eating the dog food, which frustrates him. After some time, he discovers that Mikan likes apples and noodles, but it's too late to prepare them, so he makes dinner for his sister Keed, who has been working in her room all day. When he finishes, Mikan is missing, but he finds her sleeping next to Pochi, which makes him happy that they are getting along well. The next day, Sora tells his friend Tezuki Kamiya at school about a new gift from his father, which turns out to be something normal this time. However, Tezuki is surprised to learn it is a mummy, which he finds far from normal but is curious to meet her. When Sora gets home, he is alarmed to find Mikan petrified. He quickly gives her some water, and she returns to normal. Once things calm down, Tezuki asks if he mentioned it to his aunt, but she didn't understand because she was focused on her work. Sora introduces Mikan to his friend, who notices her fear of being played with but comments that she is very adorable. At the end of the day, Sora takes a shower with Mikan and is surprised to see she can float and enjoys the water, which contradicts his previous beliefs about mummies. However, he notices that his little friend is now getting soaked with water. After classes, Sora plans to go home because he's worried about Mikan. At that moment, Tezuki gives him some materials, knowing he's struggling with his classes, and suggests they study together at his house to avoid failing the exams. When Sora arrives home, he finds Mikan dry again, so he gives her some water. He doesn't understand why this keeps happening, even though she hydrates whenever she's alone. However, the mummy expresses her desire to help with household chores, so Sora gives her a small knife to assist with cutting vegetables. Seeing that she does it well, he decides to leave her alone for a moment to look for something, but it turns out to be a bad idea as the mummy falls from the table. Luckily, Sora manages to catch her. Later, Sora finishes cooking curry and even his tired sister can smell it. When he finally has some free time, he begins to go through the notes Tezuki gave him. Mikan becomes curious about the paper, distracting Sora. When his friend arrives, he sees that Sora was drawing for the mummy. Sora then steps away to serve a snack for his friend. After doing so, he leaves again, leaving Tezuki and Mikan alone. The little mummy is still scared of him, but Tezuki tries to get her attention by offering her some food, which works. Once Mikan is with him, Tezuki holds her and notices that she's very soft, and he tries to find the end of her bandages. When Sora returns and finds out, he is upset, thinking that bandages might be her skin, and that removing them could reveal something unpleasant. He apologizes for his reaction and Sora forgives him. To make amends with Mikan, Tezuki offers her some dog food, which reconciles him with the mummy. Tezuki apologizes to Mikan, who immediately reaches out and takes his finger, making them friends. Mikan is happy with the small treat. Sora then tells his friend that Mikan has dried out again and plans to bring her to school to avoid leaving her alone. The next day, the boys are in class and Tezuki notices that Mikan is inside Sora's backpack. He is surprised that Sora actually brought her. During the break, Sora explains that he's worried something might happen to the mummy because she's dried out 4 days in a row while alone. In class, Tezuki suggests putting Mikan on the desk to keep her calmer. However, Mikan sneezes, catching the attention of Asa Motegi, a classmate. Asa is fascinated by Mikan, but thinks she's a plush toy. Sora offers to let her keep it if she wants, which surprises Tezuki and Asa. Sora then shows that he made 3 small plush toys of Mikan, so there shouldn't be a problem. However, when Asa arrives, she takes one and Sora later realizes that she took the real Mikan. Realizing this, Sora chases after Asa but can't find her. He remembers he has physical education class, so he heads there. Meanwhile, Asa is in the girls' locker room, and after changing, she goes to class, leaving Mikun alone and sad in the locker room. Seeing a hole in the wall, Mikun decides to go through it, hoping to find her owner and Tazuki. During the class, Sora can't see the little mummy but finds Asa's bag suspicious. He decides to quickly finish the race and search for Mikun. Meanwhile, Mikun is in a pipe but encounters a rat that starts chasing her everywhere. In the gym class, Sora finishes his race and immediately runs to Asa to check if Mikun is in her bag, but she isn't. Knowing she's in the girls' locker room, he heads there, but Tazuki stops him since boys aren't allowed in. Luckily, Mikun appears at that moment and Sora sees the rat chasing her. Tazuki captures the rat and Sora is happy to see his friend safe. After class, Asa apologizes to Sora for losing the plush toy he gave her. This time, Sora gives her a fake one, keeping his little friend safe. When they're back home, Sora asks Mikun if she wants to go to school with him or stay home. Although he's worried about leaving her alone, the mummy prefers to stay by his side, so she agrees to go with him. After a few days, Cade finally finishes her work. When she exits her room, Pokey jumps up to her, happy to see her. However, upon seeing the table, she notices a box of prepared food but realizes it contains dog food. When Sora returns, she regrets leaving Mikun alone, fearing that the mummy might have eaten the dog food. Later, the protagonist introduces Mikun to his aunt, explaining that it was a gift from his father and that the mummy arrived in a sarcophagus. Excited to hear this, his aunt asks to see the coffin and understands that it was indeed the gift. However, it's getting late for classes, so Sora promises to tell her more about Mikun later. Before leaving, Sora collapses as he has a fever. While Sora is in bed, Cade and Mikun are alone. The girl reassures Mikun, telling her not to be so nervous since she has met many like her before. Feeling more confident, Mikun takes Cade's finger. At that moment, Sora calls his sister, asking her to bring him water since he can't move. Both Cade and Mikun are worried and ask Sora to open the door, but he refuses, not wanting to spread his illness. However, both of them enter through the window wearing protective masks, but Sora still asks them to leave the room. Once again alone, Cade decides to do something productive. She prepares some food for her brother and asks Mikun to stay with Pochi, giving her a handkerchief that belongs to Sora. While cooking, the little mummy starts thinking about Sora and ends up crying. When Sora gets out of bed, he finds his sister desperate over Mikun and learns that she cried so much she dried out. Sora understands what was happening but finds that Mikun returns to normal when he touches her. Mikun stays with Sora while he rests and recovers from his fever. The next day, Tazuki visits his friend since Ki has to work in her room again. Fortunately, she left food and medicine ready. Sora is grateful for Tazuki's care but asks him to feed Pochi and Mikun. Tazuki then asks the mummy to look after his friend. That night, Sora is restless, worrying Mikun. Seeing the dry handkerchief, Mikun decides to find more water. She enters the container, soaks herself, and then places herself on Sora's forehead to help heal him. The next morning, Sora wakes up full of energy and completely healed, but he finds Mikun on his forehead, sick from staying up all night caring for him. Sora tells his friend about this, and Tazuki advises staying home one more day to take care of Mikun. At home, Mikun is very cold and keeps sneezing, but still feels the need to go outside despite the cold. Sora takes her out, making sure she is warm first. Once outside, Mikun tries to dig in the dirt. When she struggles, Pocky immediately helps her, and Mikun buries herself in the dirt. This worries Sora a bit, but he waits for her to come back out. Over time, Sora and Pochi become worried as Mikun hasn't emerged, and the instructions don't provide guidance on this. Meanwhile, at school, Tazuki feels a bit lonely and worried without his friend. After a few hours, Sora remembers a time when he had a bad experience with a small injured bird and fears that something similar might have happened to Mikun. At that moment, the mummy emerges from the dirt and Sora rushes to her, noting that she is hungry but otherwise well. After Mikun finishes eating, Keat arrives and announces that she has prepared a delicious meal for everyone. At that moment, she puts on glasses and her personality changes completely, becoming extroverted from her usual timid self. Even when Tazuki tries to approach her, she removes the glasses and returns to her normal self. After dinner, Tazuki confesses to his friend that he is happy they are both well, though he was worried about being blamed if anything happened to Mikun. That night, Sora begins to write down all the information he has gathered about the mummy. Meanwhile, a small monster is present in the protagonist's neighborhood. After the incident, Tazuki heads home after visiting his friend but starts hearing footsteps and noises nearby. He demands to know who's there, thinking it's a person, but it turns out to be a small Oni. The young man tells the Oni not to follow him and directs it to the kashiwagi house, where it will be received and even given food. When Tazuki gets home, his little sister greets him, though she's a bit upset because he is late. He goes to his room and upon opening the door, sees the Oni at the window. He closes the curtain because he doesn't want the Oni to stay. However, as the hours pass, the monster remains at the window, so Tazuki eventually lets it in and gives it some tissues to clean its nose while he looks for something to eat, unsure of what to provide. When he returns to the room, he finds the Oni sleeping on the bed, so he quickly removes it because it's dirty and needs to bathe first. The Oni jumps into a teacup but ends up burning itself. By the end of the night, Tazuki allows the Oni to sleep with him since it will only be for one night. The The next day, Tezuki expels the Oni from his house to prevent it from coming back. At school, the young man thinks about the monster while Asa gives Sora some mummy-shaped cookies as thanks for the stuffed toy. Sora invites his friend to eat on the school terrace while some students talk about a photograph of a small dragon. On the terrace, Tezuki tells Sora about the incident with the Oni, including having to expel it from his home because he didn't like its face. However, Sora misunderstands and suggests keeping it and introducing it to Mikan, as it might have been released after a festival they held. That night, when Tezuki returns home, the Oni is there again, and he lets it stay. Despite repeatedly removing it from his house, the monster always comes back. His sister suggests giving it a name since it's always around. When Tezuki is with Sora, the protagonist asks him to take the Oni home so it can play with Mikan. While at home, the Oni annoys Tezuki, who remembers that when he first met Sora, he was with a strange creature, and that all kinds of monsters appeared around him. He recalls that Sora said that monsters show up when they need help, but he regrets not being able to help the injured dragon he found. The young man is annoyed that the Oni is with him without being asked, but the small creature reveals it has the same scar as him, which only annoys him more and makes him confused. That night, the Oni finds Mikan's stuffed toy and becomes jealous. Later, Tezuki and the Oni visit Sora, thinking the monster might be lonely. However, when the Oni sees Mikan, it doesn't react until the Oni starts walking towards it. They both end up running around the boys until they're exhausted. When Mikan touches the Oni, it wants to keep playing, but Poki joins in, and they finally become friends. Later, Sora asks his friend to name the Oni, as he will need it. After trying various names, he settles on Kani, which the Oni likes. At mealtime, Sora proposes making makis to help them get to know each other better. Kani works hard to do it well, while Tezuki feels confused and doesn't know what to do. When Kani finishes his maki, he gives it to Tezuki, hoping he will keep it. Before leaving, Tezuki gives Sora some notes about what Kani likes, wanting him to have them in case anything happens. Sora knows that Tezuki genuinely cares about the Oni. When Tezuki gets home, he goes to take a shower, but first looks for Kani. He finds the Oni sleeping with Mikan's stuffed toy, which he finds strange since he had previously thrown the toy away. Now that he knows the little mummy, he might miss it. Tezuki wonders it's right to let Kani go, as he still regrets not helping the dragon and would feel guilty if something happened to Kani. At that moment, the monster wakes up but pretends to be asleep when Tezuki mentions taking a shower. Annoyed, Tezuki tells the Oni it's a nuisance, but Kani gets up and starts kicking him, which Tezuki finds adorable. At school, one of the students places a fake lizard on Tezuki's bench, but they quickly realize it. The young man comments that it's from someone famous, but that he has more of them, so he gives one to Sora. While Sora and his friend are on the terrace, Tezuki says he doesn't know what to do with the toy, but Mikan is very happy with the lizard since she wrapped it in bandages to resemble a mummy. However, when she does it well, she starts to cry, though Sora is there to take care of her. Meanwhile, the student who brought the lizards drops one, which ends up on Asa, who gets scared. After classes, Tezuki advises his friend to leave Mikan at home since it's been 2 months since she arrived in Japan and she should learn to be alone. This worries Sora a bit as he knows it's difficult, and he wishes there were a kindergarten for small monsters. He then asks Tezuki why he doesn't take Kani to school, and Tezuki explains that Kani is too troublesome. When Sora arrives home, he notices his sister and Pochi are there, so he decides to go to his room. Seeing the sarcophagus, he opens it and is surprised to find both of them taking a nap, so he decides to leave them alone. However, there is no food, so Sora asks Mikan to stay home alone for a while, promising to read her 2 stories if she doesn't cry. This makes the mummy happy and she bids him farewell. Meanwhile, Asa returns home with creeps to share with her mother but can't find her. She leaves a note saying there was a giant cockroach and she was so scared that she went to get insecticide. Asa laughs because she could have dealt with the cockroach herself. However, when she gets to her room, she sees a small dragon trying to stay hidden. Asa gets scared and screams, thinking it's a giant lizard, and tries to run away, falling down the stairs. The dragon approaches her, but Asa, even more frightened, continues to flee and throws objects to get rid of the dragon, but nothing works. When Sora returns from shopping, he knows he's arriving earlier than he told Mikan, so he expects her to be happy. However, on the way, he hears screams and commotion coming from a house, so he stops. At that moment, Asa runs up to him and asks for help because there's a lizard in her house. Sora decides to help her, knowing she hates lizards. When he enters her house, he finds it in disarray and starts worrying about the lizard. However, he discovers it's actually a dragon, but Asa is still scared and ends up hurting herself again. The dragon informs Sora that Asa hurt herself falling down the stairs, and he tells Asa that the dragon is actually worried about her. The dragon then approaches Asa again and gives her a flower. She hugs it and apologizes for what she did. Meanwhile, Mikan is desperate to be alone. Later, Sora takes Asa and the dragon to his house, saying he has one too, but a different kind. When they arrive, Mikan runs to Sora but stops when she sees the girl as she pretends to be a stuffed toy. However, Asa recognizes her as she always takes her to school. Sora then advises his classmate to be careful and keep it a secret because not everyone knows about these creatures, and revealing them could cause panic and be exploited for personal gain. Tezuki arrives and Sora says he has a surprise for him. He tries to cover Tezuki's eyes, but his friend resists. At that moment, the dragon arrives and Tezuki is surprised to see it, recalling the time he couldn't help the monster, but he is still happy to see it. During dinner, Asa is pleased that Sora also has one, but now they need to figure out the dragon's diet, and they realize none of the food they offered is liked. When Keed wakes up, she is surprised to see that Sora brought a girl home. After calming down, she starts playing with the dragon, and they ask Asa what name she will give it. Fortunately, the girl already has a name in mind, which she has always wanted to use, Izzo. At the end of the day, Sora escorts his classmate home, and on the way, they talk about how Izzo came to her. Meanwhile, Sora wonders if it is okay for Mikan to be far from her birthplace, as she hasn't wanted to return home since the day they met. A few days later, the kids return to school, and Ace's friends start showing off their pets, which makes her fall in love with all of them. One of the students asks why she doesn't have one since she likes animals so much, and Asa almost reveals that she has Izzo but manages to avoid it, while Tezuki and Sora overhear the conversation. After classes, the kids walk home together. On the way, Sora and Tezuki ask Asa if she was about to talk about Izzo with the other girls. Asa immediately apologizes, but the boys tell her that if she wants to talk about the dragon, she can do so with them and invite her to join their lunches since they gather on the school rooftop. She happily agrees and mentions that her dragon is very smart. That night, Sora tells his aunt that Tezuki and Asa will visit them, which makes her happy as she thinks Asa is a nice girl. Sora also says that Izzo was really good and behaves like an older brother to Mikan and Connie. This reminds Sora of when he was cleaning the bathroom and the little mummy tried to help but didn't succeed, and the same thing happened later, which only embarrassed Mikan. On Sunday, the kids visit Sora. When Izzo sees the small ones, he is happy and hugs them. The protagonist mentions that his aunt couldn't stay because she had things to do. Asa regrets this because she wanted to talk to her, but she shares that her dragon has learned to write, which she is proud of, having learned while she read stories to him. At that moment, Tezuki decides to test him and starts teaching him the alphabet. Later, Izzo learns to write his own name, which surprises everyone. While they are excited, Asa notices that the small ones seem to be plotting something, as it appears that the dragon is teaching them to write. Mikan then hands Sora a paper, and the girl tells him to be prepared as she might have written something. When he opens it, he sees the words always together, which makes him happy. Asa comments that the same happened with Izzo since she wrote him a letter, which made her excited when she read it. Connie also writes a letter, but Tezuki doesn't expect it to say anything nice, thinking it will probably ask for food. However, when he reads it, it's a question about how his handwriting is, which annoys Tezuki. After eating, Asa decides to help wash the dishes, but when she runs out of detergent and searches for more, she finds a note and Tezuki also finds another. They end up searching the entire house for the notes. Once they find them all, Connie approaches a garden and Sora asks him to stay away, but he ignores the request and pulls out a small mandrake that starts screaming. Fortunately, the protagonist manages to cover its mouth. He explains that this was sent by his father, and its scream can make you faint or even take your life in just 5 seconds. Tezuki doesn't understand how he didn't get rid of it, but it turns out Ki uses it to wake people up. However, the mandrake escapes from the house and removes the bandage, making it dangerous. They chase after it, but end up exhausted. Luckily, they catch up to it at a river. Mikan and Connie try to help but fail, while Izzo saves the day. However, this upsets the little mummy. When they return home, Sora replants the mandrake, and everything returns to normal, though Mikan remains depressed. The protagonist notices she is concerned about Connie, who fell into the water, and realizes she was just worried and is growing up. At the end of the day, the kids say goodbye to their friends. Once Sora and Mikan are alone, they decide to take a bath and then go to sleep, while the protagonist reads a story that ends up being confusing due to its mixed-up narrative. Meanwhile, Tezuki prepares a bath for Connie after a long day, but due to an accident, he ends up soaked. They then go to sleep, but the noise at the window keeps the Oni awake, who is scared but eventually falls asleep in the boy's hand. At Ace's house, she finishes studying but decides to read a bit more since she has some time. However, Izzo feels anxious. Once she finishes, she decides to take a bath with the dragon, but she sees that he has already done it by himself. At bedtime, Izzo worries that Asa might get sick because she is underdressed, so he warms her up and stays by her side. On a school day, a student named Dachi Takiaki has nightmares during class and upon waking is frightened, causing his classmates to fear him. Even when he leaves the classroom, others talk about him, but the young man doesn't feel well and ends up fainting on top of Sora. Later, Tezuki and Asa wait for Sora for lunch on the rooftop, but he is taking too long and Mikan is hungry and wants to start eating but doesn't want to without their friend. At that moment, Sora arrives carrying a boy. The protagonist explains that he took the boy to the nurse's office, but he was kicked out for breaking some things and was only given a blanket. Everyone notices that the boy seems to be having a nightmare while he sleeps. Tezuki mentions that one of the other students said there was a strange and troublesome boy in one of the classes. Just as Asa and Mikan approach, Takiaki wakes up and is about to hit Asa, but Sora saves her. He realizes that the boy is hurt and tries to help, but he refuses. This upsets Tezuki, who confronts him. but the student insists they stay away from him because he is dangerous and decides to leave. Later, Sora goes to the boy's class but doesn't know his name. Fortunately, Takoyaki comes out of class, and although the student asks to be left alone because he hears people talking about him, Sora gives him a bandage for his wound and offers to accompany him home to talk privately and keep him from fainting again. On the way, the young man explains that he lives alone since his parents abandoned him and that he is a sleepwalker who always has nightmares, making it harder for him to sleep well. Despite trying, doctors haven't provided a solution, but he feels secure with his amulets, which Sora asks to see. When they reach Takoyaki's apartment, the protagonist is amazed to find more than 1,000 amulets. He decides to take them all out and gives Takoyaki a drawing of a Baku, asking him to place it under his pillow as Bacchus eat nightmares. After spending so much time, they finally introduce themselves and Sora gives his number in case he needs help. That night, Takoyaki places the drawing under his pillow and before sleeping, he thinks that Sora is a good person for caring about someone like him. When the young man wakes up, he realizes he didn't have nightmares but sees a creature in his room eating, which scares him and he calls Sora, telling him a monster is eating his soul. The protagonist rushes to the boy's house, worried, but upon seeing the monster, he is excited because it's a real Baku. This surprises Takoyaki, who didn't expect that reaction. Sora asks him to hold it, and the student realizes it's not bad and is actually soft. The protagonist then asks if it's the first time he has seen such a creature, and when he learns it is, Sora shows Mikan and mentions that it is a real mummy. The next day, Sora meets with his friends, but they notice he looks sleepy. He explains that he was with Daichi because a Baku appeared to him. Asa is fascinated and wants to see it, but when they look for Takoyaki in class, he's not there, nor in the following days, which worries Sora. However, on the fourth day, the student appears again, looking very bright. He tells the protagonist that he finally managed to sleep, although he woke up after several days. Takoyaki apologizes to Asa for almost hitting her, which she is not upset about and is happy that he is feeling better. Sora takes the opportunity to invite the young man to eat with them. Later, Tazuki and Takoyaki are alone on the rooftop while the others go to get food. They are both quiet since they are introverted, and Daichi is nervous because their first encounter almost ended in a fight. They try to have a simple conversation, but both feel uncomfortable. When Sora and Asa arrive, it relieves them, but Mikan takes Tazuki's hand and places it in the students, thinking it's a game, but it's not, as Mikan starts barking. The protagonist says maybe Mikan wants them to make up, so at Mikan's request, they end up doing so. At night, the new member visits Sora and the other friends. All the small monsters are happy to have the Baku with them, and even climb on him, which annoys him a bit. The kids wonder what name Takoyaki will give him, and Takoyaki says he was calling him Mukumuku, but wants to give him a worthy name. However, none of the suggested names are liked by the kids, so Mukumuku is chosen. The next day, Takoyaki thanks Sora for caring about him, even visiting him in the early morning. He is very grateful since no one has done something like that for him. However, he must apologize to the nurse and teachers for the trouble he caused before going to class. The protagonist blushes and assures him that they are friends. After classes, Asa quickly returns home because Ezo is waiting for her. On the way, she overhears two men talking about an Oni child. When she arrives home, she sees Connie there and tells Tazuki about it, including that Connie was spotted. The boys are worried because no one should know about them, so they think it would be a good idea to have someone watch over the small ones while they are at school. Sora thinks he knows the right person for the job, but needs to ask first. Later, the kids visit a temple where Sora thanks the grandfather for helping by looking after the small ones. Asa and Takoyaki are left speechless when they see that it's a statue of Buddha. The Buddha mentions that Sora and Tazuki often visit and make offerings. Suddenly, someone appears behind the protagonist, frightening Asa and Daichi even more when they see this person taking their friend. They rush into the temple worried, asking the monster to release their companion. However, they find Sora fine drinking tea, and he explains that the person is actually the temple goddess who offered to look after the small ones while they are away. At school, the kids wonder what the small ones are doing, but Takoyaki uses the opportunity to ask how to address his new friends Tazuki and Asa. Both choose their respective nicknames, and Sora sees that they are finally getting along. After school, the kids pick up the monsters and find that they had a good time together. The next day, Sora leaves Mikan at the temple and sees that the others are already there, so he heads to class, telling the mummy to wait there until he finishes school. That morning, the small ones are playing in the temple, but Mukumuku accidentally knocks the door, leaving it slightly ajar. Mikan sees a small insect on the other side and goes out to catch it, but when the goddess notices the door is open, she closes it, unaware that the mummy is outside. Mikan tries to get back inside and begins to knock on the door, but hears a human approaching, so he hides under the stairs. Once the human leaves, a small Oni appears and, following directions, asks if Mikan is alone. Mikan thinks it's Connie and decides to follow him. However, it starts to rain and both head to the forest next to the temple. The mummy feels he is getting farther from his friends but continues on with the Oni. Inside the forest, he is amazed by the variety of monsters and magical creatures. Meanwhile, the goddess sees the small ones sleeping but realizes one is missing. The temple goddess goes out to search for Mikan but can't find him. Mikan arrives arrives at the small house of the Oni, which he likes very much. They talk a bit, and the Oni suggests staying there until the rain stops since otherwise, Mikan won't be able to return home. This makes the mummy sad, and he begins to cry. The Oni realizes that Mikan might not have been lost, but just wanted to go back to the temple, so he decides to take him there. At the temple, the goddess is desperate because she can't find Mikan, but he suddenly appears, making her very happy. The Oni says goodbye to her. Later, the rain stops, and the kids look for their friends. The woman tells Sora that Mikan was outside and got lost, but the Oni brought him back home. This makes the boy a little happy, though he asks Mikan not to be alone since it's dangerous. However, she couldn't thank her new friend, so they decide to leave a drawing in the place, which the monster later finds. That night, Mikan can't sleep because he is worried about the Oni, but Sora comforts her, saying that he has probably already found the drawing and is looking at it right now. On a new day, Tezuki's little sister is crying and asks her brother to find Connie because she is upset that he ate the dessert Sora made for her. The young man asks her to forgive Connie this time, but it turns out this has happened 9 times already. That night, Tezuki angrily reprimands Connie for eating things that don't belong to him. Connie, however, is not interested in listening, which frustrates Tezuki even more. He tells Connie that if he doesn't want to follow the rules, he should leave as he can't care for someone who doesn't listen. This makes Connie recall when humans laughed at and mistreated him, but he decides to go to sleep to avoid hearing more. The next morning, Tezuki wakes up and notices Connie isn't with him. During class, the kids gather and talk about what the small ones usually write. It appears they enjoy it a lot, but Sora mentions that Mikan only memorized the symbols Izzo taught him, so he can only write those. Later, they notice that Tezuki seems unwell and ask why he didn't bring Connie to the temple. Tezuki mentions that Connie left, which is something he often does. When he arrives home, Tezuki's sister shows him that she prepared something special for Connie, as she thinks she overreacted in challenging him. She mentions that Connie hasn't come down to bother her all day. When Tezuki checks his room, he finds that Connie is still not there, so he suspects that Connie must have left after he asked him to. This seems strange to him because when he first met Connie, he tried to get rid of him, but the monster wouldn't leave. The next day, Sora notices that his friend doesn't look well and hasn't slept, so Tezuki tells him that Connie still hasn't returned. Sora suggests going to look for Connie after classes, but Tezuki doesn't want to, as it was his decision. Still, Sora knows that his friend is worried and doesn't want to show it. That afternoon after classes, Asa and Takoyaki arrive because they heard about Connie's disappearance and plan to search for him with Sora. Tezuki opposes this and asks them not to. However, as he is heading to the club, he starts recalling the time he tried to save a small dragon, so he immediately runs to stop his friends. Meanwhile, the kids are at the temple and ask the small ones if they have seen Connie. Upon learning that he hasn't been there, they are told that he is lost. Mikan wants to help, but Sora asks him to stay there, while Asa and Takoyaki ask their small ones to look after Mikan. Tezuki chases after his friends to stop them, but still feels the need to search for Connie, despite thinking it's very selfish. He never listens, is annoying and irritating, but he still wants to find him and regrets the words he said that night. He stops, feeling guilty, and starts to cry. At that moment, Sora appears and says that he took the day off from the club. Just then, Sora spots a small Oni and says it is Connie, so both start following him. As Tezuki runs, he expresses all his thoughts, regretting having sent Connie away. However, the Oni is faster and Tezuki cannot catch up. Sora continues the chase, but when the monster stops, Sora realizes it isn't Connie. Tezuki ends up at a property that is for sale, while Mikan remains at the temple, sad about his friend. Tezuki climbs onto the property and sees Connie trapped in a hole. He helps him out but tells him they need to talk later. Just then, Sora arrives to explain that it was another Oni, while Asa and Takoyaki arrive, saying they found a small item in the river and now need to go there. Tezuki stops them, saying he has found Connie, which makes the worried kids happy. When they arrive at the temple, Mukuwuku Izzo and Mikan have made a welcome drawing for Connie, where the kids are also depicted. The young man tells his monster that everyone was worried, including him. On the way home, Tezuki apologizes to Connie for what he said the previous night. He explains that he didn't mean to say it but was upset because Connie doesn't listen. He even asks how Connie would feel if someone ate his sweets. Tezuki then confesses that he is not good at taking care of others like Sora is, since he once tried to take care of a dragon and only made things worse. Although things are okay now, he asks Connie if he is comfortable with his behavior, and if he is willing to completely change his actions, he can stay, as in the end, they are family and should go home together. This makes Connie remember a time when he saw a girl holding hands with her mother and going home, and he wished for that. So he becomes emotional upon hearing Tezuki's words. The next day, Tezuki tells the kids that Connie now listens to what he says and can be controlled a bit, which makes everyone happy that things have been resolved. On a new day, the protagonist arrives home and informs his sister that his friends will be visiting, but he finds that she isn't there. He then sees a note saying that a package has arrived from his brother, which seems normal, but Sora starts to hear noises coming from it. Unsure of what to do, Sora thinks he should first ensure the safety of Mikan and Pochi. At that moment, the phone rings. It's Tezuki, who's outside. Sora tries to avoid him, but Tezuki enters the house without trouble, knowing Sora was trying to get rid of him because his father sent another package. Once inside, Sora prepares to defend himself while he and Tezuki, along with the monsters and Pochi, leave the house. At that instant, the box opens, releasing black smoke and a voice claiming to be Anubis, a boy from Japan, but they can call him Ayan. However, the boys can't see anything. When the smoke clears, the boys see that it is indeed Anubis, but just a decorative statue. He is upset because the young man tried to attack him and asks to be released from the box. To ensure he isn't dangerous, they ask if he will cast a curse, as he is used to doing. Once removed from the box, Ayan explains that his father chose him for Sora, although it took him some time to decide, as he wanted to buy something for his son that wouldn't scare him and would remind him of his childhood. The statue then notices Mikan and asks what he is. Sora explains that Mikan is a mummy, but Ayan doubts this since the lizard mummy he knew was completely wrinkled and petrified. To confirm, he starts to nibble on Mikan, which scares Sora, but he does it so gently that Mikan ends up liking it. Although not entirely convinced, Ayan is persuaded by Sora that Mikan is indeed a mummy and that he is alive. Ayan then tells Sora that he should be amazed because he can see the future and tries to demonstrate it, but doesn't convince him. He also mentions that there is an extra gift for Sora, which Tezuki confirms and sees that there are notes in a bag at the bottom of the box. Sora stops him, thinking it might be dangerous, but Ayan explains that his father sent sand from Egypt. Even so, Sora takes precautions, and upon seeing it is just sand, he is somewhat disappointed. However, Mikan is happy and excited as she recognizes it as sand from her homeland and immediately starts playing with it. Later, Asa and Takoyaki arrive at Sora's house and are introduced to the new member. The kids don't have a good first impression as Ayan is playing with Pochi, making him roll around the house on wheels. After introductions, Aset is startled to see the statue biting Aizo, but is told that it's Ayan's way of showing affection. However, when he does the same to Mukumuku, the Baku flies through the air, making Ayan worried that it might have exploded due to him, but he later sees that Mukumuku is fine. As the kids discuss the Anubis, Sora notices that Asa is wearing different hair clips and tells her they look great. Tezuki, hearing this, starts to remember that his friend was always like this and wonders if he was ever embarrassed or if he ever felt embarrassed. At that moment, Sora starts to hiccup, feeling embarrassed, and Tezuki feels relieved that he can also experience it. However, the hiccups won't go away, and the kids mention that it's said you can die from hiccups if they last 100 times, which worries the small ones, including Mikan, who is on the verge of fainting. When Sora sees Mikan's behavior and realizes he is about to remove his bandage, he tries to stop him, but Poki quickly carries Mikan away, while Tezuki stops his friend, seizing the opportunity to see inside Mikan. His view is obscured by something shiny, allowing Sora to escape and stop his little friend, asking why he's doing this. The monsters explain it was due to the hiccups and their fear of what might happen, but Tezuki reassures them that it's just a myth, which calms everyone down. Later, Mikan returns to normal and the kids have to go home. Asa remarks that the place has turned into a zoo of strange creatures, with only Pochi being normal. However, Sora informs her that their dog is actually 50 years old and is a rare species that lives for 100 years, which surprises everyone. At the end of the day, Keed meets Ayan and is happy that he can talk. The statue is pleased with the warm welcome and says he had a great day. Sora tells him he can stay as long as he wants, hoping that it will be forever. When the protagonist was a child, he invited his friend to the Divine Earth Festival after receiving invitations from an Oni, but Tezuki refuses to go. During class, some students show the group a photograph of an animal. Tezuki says it looks like a dog, but the student is unsure because the animal disappeared after the photo was taken and seemed injured. Sora and Tezuki are surprised and decide to tell Asa and Takoyaki, suspecting it might be an inugami, as adults often take on human forms and speak. Asa suggests searching the mountain where it was seen, as it might be injured, and Tezuki agrees, which surprises Sora as he thought Tezuki would resist. The next day, the group arrives at the temple to leave the small ones in the care of the goddess. However, Mikan refuses to stay because she had a nightmare the previous night and couldn't find Sora, who had been watching TV with Ayan, leaving her unable to be alone. Thus, they take her along. Upon reaching the mountain, they are amazed by its size, but soon realize there are two paths. They decide to split up. Takoyaki asks the protagonist if something happened between him and his friend since they haven't spoken all day. Sora admits they said things they shouldn't have. They then notice something strange as they see no animals or hear any sounds. After an hour, they regroup where the path splits. There, they all sense something is wrong and decide to leave. Just as Sora steps forward, he notices something has changed. Looking back, there is now only one path, and suddenly, music starts playing. Sora realizes they are at the Divine Earth Festival, which humans can only access with an invitation. He tells the group they need to leave, but it's too late as three monsters find them and demand their invitations. Without them, Sora tries to handle the situation but only makes things worse, injuring the monsters for being there. However, Mikan finds 4 invitations in the protagonist's pocket and saves them from being destroyed, but Tezuki is upset, saying Sora always makes decisions without consulting. Inside, Sora manages to catch up with his friend and asks why he got upset. At that moment, Yamada, a great Oni friend of the protagonist, appears. Seeing him, Sora remembers that the invitations were from Yamada. Asa and Takoyaki arrive, alive, and the Oni embraces them, liking humans. They ask Yamada about the injured Inugami, and Yamada mentions it might be the small A and U, as they were seen by humans. When they find the two brothers, they are fighting and separate. Tazuki tells the others they will handle it. Once they reach the brothers, they talk with them, empathizing with their situation as they had also fought among themselves, but they eventually resolve their differences. Meanwhile, a man arrives at the festival and the monsters realize he might be a collector since the invitation is damaged. At the festival, Sora and Tazuki talk about their fear of being apart but promise to always stay together despite their concerns. Later, Yamada takes them to a waterfall, explaining that before having fun, they should cleanse their body and soul there. Mikan is happy to touch the water, but as the group observes the Inugami, a man takes Mikan away. A monster soon arrives asking if they saw a suspicious man, and Sora quickly turns around to find that his little mummy is missing. After the incident, the monster at the reception is certain that the infiltrated human is the suspect in Mikan's disappearance and that he is a collector. Sora begins to panic as the alarms sound, signaling that they have lost sight of the human. At that moment, Takoyaki remembers that the temple goddess had placed a tag on Mikan before they went to the mountain. Everyone starts calling Mikan, while the man has the mummy and finds it something new to him. He even tries to find the end of the bandage, but just then the tag surfaces, allowing Tazuki to find them. They are climbing the waterfall, so they must scale the rocks. Asa throws Tazuki far with strength and starts climbing. However, she slips and is about to fall, but the Inugamis catch her, and they manage to climb up together as a team. Once there, the man removes the thread from Mikan. When Mikan falls, he tries to escape but fails. At that moment, Sora appears and demands that the man leave the mummy alone. However, the man refuses, saying it is worth a lot of money and otherwise is worthless to him. To Sora, however, Mikan is family, and in her anger, she jumps on him but is overpowered by the collector. Just then, the Earth God manifests and deals with the man, freeing Mikan, although both were desperate to be separated. After everything is resolved, the monsters thank the group for stopping the criminal, who will now be punished by the Earth God for his actions. The group receives gifts for their help, and Sora thanks his friends and the Inugamis. When they return to the temple, they recount the day's challenges but are grateful to the goddess for resolving the problem. At the end of the day, the group gathers at Sora's house, where they discuss the festival. Ayan, curious now, realizes that the small ones are upset because they weren't taken to the festival. However, the protagonist still has the gift they were given, which, to their surprise, contains items to organize a small festival. They proceed to hold the festival, and the group, including the small ones and yukatas, enjoy the festivities. The group has a great time at the small festival, enjoying games and sweet treats, and then they make plans to take trips together in the coming years. Thus, the anime concludes with the protagonist returning to his normal daily activities, now accompanied by new family members and friends.